in cinemas and shown on television. It seems to me, however, that this dialogue, however vital, is rapidly becoming obsolete at a time when our fundamental ability to retain information and make sense of it is seriously under attack. The languages of pop music, politics and advertising have merged into a kind of sales speak that is now used to describe virtually everything that exists beyond the envelopes of our own skin. Each time we listen to the news, a sense of mounting unease is reinforced, creating a base which is then immediately overlaid with an extraordinary flood of images and suggestions from fictions, dramas and advertisements. The effect of all this is to instill an undying nervous excitement which we experience as a catalogue of intolerable yearnings. We yearn for beauty, ideologies, somewhere to go, somewhere to stay, someone to be, someone to love, a better mummy, a stronger daddy, Argyle socks, a telephone that you can use in the street, someone to talk to. The point I want to make is that the degree of our engulfment has changed radically, particularly in the last couple of years. Of course, the media have always provided an infinite range of other worlds for us to inhabit, all of which have in common the provision of a not now and a not here. When I'm in the street these days, am I not effectively absent in all but shoe leather, a walking repository of impossible cravings, a ghost on automatic pilot, gazing out of some imaginary window onto greener, ever more enticing elsewheres? A vast new territory opens up before our very feet, an unoccupied, unexploited England where everybody's gone out to lunch, or to Dallas, or Miami, or Hawaii, or Brideshead, or Mandalay, or India, or Transylvania, or Oz, or Wimbledon, or Stamford Bridge, or across to Vietnam, or up to the stars, or back to the future. Better see if there's anything on television.
This week, we take a look at the new Sylvester Stallone movie, Rambo. Exploiting a resurgence of American patriotism and endorsed by Ronald Reagan, the film has already broken box office records worldwide. Hollywood returns to Vietnam and rewrites history.
Carly, eat!
We also look at the case of the IBA and scum. Mary Whitehouse objected to Channel 4's transmission of the film and took the IBA to court. She lost, but do the IBA know they won?
I think that the public deserves a medal going to some cinemas.
But first, the Cannon Film Empire, founded by Menachem Golan and Yolam Globus. We have been constantly reminded in the past of the decline in the British cinema-going audience, but it would appear the tide is turning. In the belief that it is the cinemas themselves which deter patrons rather than ticket prices or product, Cannon and Thorny MI are this year investing millions of pounds in refurbishing their existing cinemas in Britain, as well as building new multi-screen complexes, such as those planned for Bristol and Milton Keynes. The Cineplex in Los Angeles, part of the large Beverly Center shopping complex, has 14 screens. A lavish example of what we can soon expect on a smaller scale in Britain. Cinemas with shopping, restaurant and parking facilities for those who have cars and can afford to eat and shop out, as well as see a movie. Cannon were the first of the majors in Britain to realize that the cinema needed a facelift and a new, caring image. Their production slate also boasts some 30 feature films to be shot this year by directors as diverse as Robert Altman, Jean-Luc Godard and Tobe Hooper. Whatever one might think of Cannon's highly successful operations, they are undoubtedly a major new force in cinema, employing that old-fashioned entrepreneurial spirit. And it seems to be working.
The public in England are right. Because what we feel like in many countries around Europe or also in America, that theaters were just neglected. Exhibitors did not reinvest to keep up the modern cinema as it used to be in the 50s or early 60s. If you will give the audience the right cinema, clean cinema, with a smiling usherette, a smiling manager, and comfortable chairs, very good sound, and very good pictures, they will come again. As long as young people will exist in the world, and hopefully we believe that they will exist, and this is the fact, cinema will exist. Our philosophy is that you divorce the cinema when you get married. Our philosophy is to play any kind of movie for any kind of audiences. It means from exploitation pictures to a super artistic movie. And for the super art movies, we are just rebuilding now the Swiss Center in the West End in England. There are 4 screens, and one screen will be a cinematheque, which does not exist in the West End, and where this cinema will play every day another movie for the cinema freaks who likes to see good movies or old classical movies, and the other 3 screens will play artistic movies.
How successful are your exhibition outlets in Britain compared to those in other countries you also own?
Right now we have cinemas in England, which we are the 2nd largest chain today. We are the 1st largest chain in Holland. We are the 1st largest chain in Italy, and we just started buying cinemas into Germany. In England, we changed it upside down, and the same classic chains that lost a fortune on operating in 1982, now in 85, makes an operation profit, and big profit. We started 25 years ago in a small country, Israel. And we were very successful there. We passed a very bad time, but we grow very slowly and rapidly. And then when we reached what we wanted to reach in Israel, you know, we left and we came to America. And in America, we surrounded ourselves with people which are cinema people, which they love cinema, and they are doing the business for the sake of the cinema. And that's not Hollywood today. Hollywood is a machine today. The studios are a machine. You press a button and the robot comes, and that's how they do movies. I think that the Canon Group today, between exhibition, distribution, and production, is supporting 3,000 people around the world. 3,000 families. 3,000 people who are dedicated and committed to cinema. They love cinema, they love what they are doing. And this is what makes the difference. And I think this is the key to the success.
Canon, it seems, has a very clear view of what the public wants and how it should be served. The BBC, on the other hand, has lost its way. Public service broadcasting embodied by the BBC has come under attack. The Peacock Committee is currently considering alternative methods of financing the corporation. The BBC's loss of nerve was most graphically illustrated recently by the postponement of the Real Lives film At the Edge of the Union. Its own staff, apparently more concerned to safeguard its independence than was its board of governors, staged a one-day protest against the postponement of the programme. Anthony Smith urges the BBC to reform from within in order to meet the challenges from without.
There are an awful lot of people in Parliament and the press at the present time peddling instant formulae for the reform of the British broadcasting system. Some of them are very interesting. Unfortunately, many of them ignore, as many people have for decades, the unique secret of the British broadcasting system, which is simply that the organisations that provide the programmes are not competing for funds. They're competing for audiences, but each of them has a different source of funds which the others do not draw upon: the licence fee, television advertising, and the special grant to Channel 4. That means that the BBC, at the heart of the broadcasting system of this country, has been able to develop as a unique resource, never worried about its sources of funding. It has acquired enormous collections of material, a tremendous and, by world standards, a unique experience, which is, or should be, wholly available to the society at this point in the century. But instead, the BBC has remained rather a closed institution. And now with the new competitor on the scene, Channel 4, operating entirely as an open organisation, the BBC's closeness seems to grow all the more conspicuous by comparison. What I think is needed is not legislative change, is not forcing the BBC to take advertising, is not sharing out the licence fee among other broadcasting organisations, or any of these other quick formulae dreamt up by one interest group or another. What is needed is a gigantic act of self-dedication, self-reform within the BBC itself. We've seen in recent months how the staff of the BBC offered a unique example of an organisation determined to be seen to be independent, to be seen to be operating within its traditional principles. It was a heartwarming incident in an otherwise rather depressing world. That needs to be built upon, and the BBC needs to look again at the society which is developing, far more heterogeneous than the world in which John Reith operated, or even the world in which, of the 60s, in which Sir Hugh Green ran the BBC. It needs to recognise that the skills of using moving images, and radio for that matter, and video, are general communicating skills of the society, not the unique mystery of an employed workforce. The BBC needs to be what it told the Annan Committee it was, a great public foundation offering its resources to the society at large.
Feet on the mat, legs apart, face the governor. Name and number to the governor.
4737 Carlin, sir.
I will have no violence in this institution. There is no violence here.
The IBA was established to supervise commercial broadcasting. It was established at a time when, I suppose, commercial exploitation of the ether was really not known, was suspected, so it was thought that there had to be a supervisory body, and a body that had to be given very wide powers. And the statutory powers that the IBA was given were powers which gave it a duty to ensure that nothing was transmitted on commercial channels which was contrary to good taste or decency, or was likely to offend public feeling.
It is difficult to ignore the controversy surrounding the BBC's Real Lives programme, but easy to miss news of Mary Whitehouse's court action against the IBA, the Independent Broadcasting Authority, for permitting Channel 4 to screen the film Scum. The case received less than lavish media attention. Scum, you may remember, dealt with the brutality of Borstal life. Arguably, the Scum case has equally significant implications as to what can and cannot be shown by the independent networks, Channel 4 and ITV alike. Inevitably, it all comes down to a question of the interpretation of the Broadcasting Act.
What you've got to understand about the Broadcasting Act is that it's not a strict law. It's not a criminal law that puts anyone in danger of fines or imprisonment for breaking it. It's not a civil law which provides remedies for and costs and damages. It is simply laying down a number of pious principles.
The IBA has never had, as it were, a list of words that can't be said or shown on television. It's never said there are things, actions which cannot be shown. So that I think you do have to make value judgments. Earlier on, some months before this particular case arose, we spent a lot of time thinking about a play offered for ITV called Oi for England, which is all about a skinhead. Now that had an enormous amount of strong language, but it was transmitted without cuts, and undoubtedly a value judgment was made in that.
Yes, Scum, of course, was a controversial play, first made for the BBC but not transmitted by it. It was then made into a film. The film was shown, it was something of a critical success, and Channel 4 wanted to screen it. Certain people in the IBA thought that the film lacked merit, but the IBA's director, John Whitney, decided that it was a film of merit and that the screening should go ahead.
That's it.
Then what the hell are we doing, you Black Brixton slag?
Nothing, sir, honest.
Fighting. You're booked for fighting, Governor's report,
Sir,
right?
wasn't, sir.
Right!
Yes, sir.
Attention, everybody by your side. Name and number.
4736 Angel, sir.
Louder!
4736 Angel, sir.
Straight out the banana trees, eh? Well, you take it from me, Nick Nog. You go stealing white man's motor cars and you get white man's stick. Right?
Sir.
And I get this cell scrubbed. For the devil!
The screening was criticised by only 3 viewers in the entire British Isles phoned up to complain. One of them was Mrs. Whitehouse, who took her complaint to the Divisional Court and argued that the IBA as a board should have met, because this was such a serious matter, and should have itself solemnly viewed the film, and all the board members should have participated in deciding whether the film should have been screened.
Nonetheless, the implications of that lower court decision would, I think, almost certainly have meant that the authority itself would have had to see far more programmes in advance of transmission than it does. Normally it sees about 2 or 3 programmes in advance of transmission a year. And we saw pretty rapidly, actually, a number of people coming forward to challenge the IBA in the courts. Found ourselves at one period under the barrage of solicitors' letters saying our clients are worried about this particular programme, which we understand is due to be transmitted on such a date. We therefore ask whether the authority has done its statutory duty by previewing this programme.
What the Court of Appeal said was that the IBA's only duty was to devise and operate a system designed to ensure that the statutory requirements are met, and the court won't interfere so long as the system that they devise is reasonable. The court will only intervene to tell the IBA that it's broken the law if the system that they've adopted is one that no reasonable group of people could operate. And the Court of Appeal went on to say, well, look, the mere fact that a single programme is broadcast which offends against one of the requirements doesn't mean that the system operated by the IBA is wrong.
I don't think that the victory means, or can be taken to mean, any change in the authorities' policy in relation to different programmes. I think they have to be taken on their merits in relation to the legislation itself. The legislation hasn't changed. That remains, and one of the points which the appeal court pointed to was the fact that the special obligations laid upon Channel 4 in terms of the programme output of Channel 4 did not mean that the more general provisions of the Broadcasting Act about what could and should be included were overridden. They were not.
That gives the IBA a great deal of choice. The IBA can comply with its statutory duties by imposing the most rigorous censorship. The IBA can comply with its statutory duties by imposing no pre-censorship and simply monitoring and criticising when it believes that offence is given. The IBA has chosen a middle course at the moment. It's chosen a course which does, I think, a little too much on the side of censorship.
The system does actually operate in terms of not only the Broadcasting Act, but established programme guidelines which are published for programme companies and Channel 4's own internal editorial processes, and in the final analysis our own right to ask for previews of programmes or scripts if we so choose. But the system of regulation is essentially, I think, a retrospective one. We don't spend all our time sitting in front of videotapes, actually, despite what is sometimes alleged.
After all, when you're operating a system which is, I suppose, pivots upon offence to public feeling, then it's not a bad idea to let the programme go out and see just whether the public does take offence. I suspect in relation to a lot of programmes that the IBA has meddled with and has insisted upon changes to, there would in fact be very little public offence taken if those programmes went out. And what I suppose the system that I'd prefer the IBA to choose is one which gives the viewer the greatest choice, which allows the viewer ultimately to be the Court of Appeal.
What is it you want? my letter. It came today.
Yes, I know.
Will you read it?
But I have already.
Read it.
Dear Ronald, sorry we have not wrote to you for so long, but things have been busy. Anyway, we thought we'd better let you know that Candy died last week and we buried her. She looked very pretty and looked peaceful, and since you have not seen her for some time, we thought you should know this. We'll have to dash, things are busy. Good luck, George and Bet. Well, Toyne. Somebody's pet. A dog. Budgie.
My wife. Candy was my nickname for my wife.
Critics of the IBA have long argued that it could adopt a more liberal interpretation of its duties. The Court of Appeal did not criticize the IBA's system of monitoring ITV and Channel 4 programs in advance of transmission, but it did recognize the possibility that the IBA could operate a different supervisory system, which would equally well comply with the provisions of the Broadcasting Act. A system, for instance, which would concern itself with individual programs only after transmission. The weakness of the present system, whatever the IBA's intentions, lies in the fact that second-guessing by program makers and TV executives as to what can be allowed on screen inexorably leads to self-censorship. Meanwhile, the IBA disregards its victory in the courts and clings steadfastly to the status quo. Coming next, Rambo.
Rambo, what most people call hell, he calls home.
Rambo, First Blood Part 2, is the continuing story of ex-Vietnam War veteran John Rambo, here dispatched by the American government to Vietnam to establish the existence of American POWs. On its release in the States, it grossed more money in its first 3 days than all but one other picture in the entire history of the cinema. Its box office success has continued worldwide, particularly and ironically in those parts of the Third World where continual warfare is a daily reality. When it opened here 3 days ago, it was already known as a phenomenon. The problem with the Hollywood phenomenon is that arguments about whether it is a good or bad movie seem redundant in the face of extraordinary popular success. Rambo, for instance, has been dubbed dumb and politically offensive on the one hand, and a first-rate action movie on the other. Whatever your viewpoint, Rambo obviously does speak to and for millions of Americans and non-Americans, and so it is the phenomenon of Rambo that we examine. The film's appeal is largely due to Hollywood's unsurpassed ability to manufacture pure adventure. Rambo is as superhuman as Luke Skywalker, Tarzan, or Superman himself, an Indiana Jones in North Vietnam, and his actions are filmed with the same two-dimensional comic strip verve. The film's point of view is drowned in a roller coaster ride of movie magic and effects. But what is contentious about Rambo is its desire to combine Hollywood adventure 1980 style with a recent and painful history. It seems to understand only too well America's need to see that history rewritten for the big screen. And the emotional premise that POWs are still being held in Vietnam is the crucial fantasy it sustains and feeds.
It's a very nagging question. I often put myself in that position. If I had a brother who was lost, I could never just say for certain that he was dead. I'd want to know for sure.
I think it will be controversial. I think there'll be a lot of criticism, both pro and con. I think that, again, it will open a lot of wounds that probably need reopening. You know, we still have, what is it, 2,485 or something, close to 2,500 vets that are in action. We don't know where they are. We don't know, it's quite possible that they're still in camps, that they're still being held prisoner. No one knows. No one has told us. And it opens that door. And I think it opens it in a way that I think you're going to have fans standing in the aisles and cheering.
It's probably the last link of the war that remains unsolved. And it's also the most painful for many, because it has destroyed their families' lives, and their wives always have this doubt, could he be alive?
I strongly believe personally that there are American prisoners of war still being held against their will in Southeast Asia.
I don't think there are POWs. I think they're MIAs. I think there are people who haven't been accounted for. I just don't think that there are Americans still living behind communist lines. You know, that's an indignity that I don't think an American could survive this long.
I hope to establish a character that can represent a certain section of the American consciousness, and through the entertainment also be educational.
Sylvester Stallone kind of came in at the end of a movement that was really going on for several years. You take people that are doing this, you know, playing these survival games, these war games, this kind of thing. The one thing in their minds is that they want to win. And that's the one thing that Americans have not been doing for the past several decades. We lost in Vietnam. We really lost in Vietnam. Every time Americans turned around the past 20 years, we've lost something. People are tired of this. They want to win. They want a hero like Rambo, you know. Sly Stallone just came in at the end of things and said, well, I'm going to be that hero and make a movie.
One of the lines in this picture, at the very opening of the picture, Troutman goes to see Rambo, who's in prison for what he had done in Blood One.
Covert operations being geared up in the Far East. Your name was dug out by the computer as one of 3 most able to complete the mission. Mission? Recon for POWs in Nam. You interested? Yeah.
Rambo says, this time do we get to win? And I think that's a sense of frustration that so many of the vets felt. And Troutman says to him, this time it's up to you.
Individual action is also the solution peddled by the Soldiers of Fortune, who held their annual convention in Las Vegas this year. To fully appreciate the domestic climate from which Rambo emerges, one must take account of such influential mercenary organizations. They, like John Rambo, believe the American government isn't doing enough to combat communism, making it necessary for the freelance soldier to rush in where politicians fear to tread. Their magazine has a substantial and loyal readership. Some Americans regard them as opinion leaders, the real action army unhindered by liberal considerations.
Our activities in El Salvador would indicate that the fact that they are continuing there and that we have been operating there for 2.5 years would suggest that we are making a significant contribution, otherwise they simply would not put up with us. We know a lot of professional soldiers that support what we're doing because they know that the U.S. government, for whatever reason, can't do it. Well, I think the politicians in many cases are wrong or too timid. And of course that's why myself and other people in the private sector have become involved. But I don't think, I strongly feel anything we're doing is not going to lead to a nuclear confrontation. We're simply picking up slack where the administration has not been allowed to move into simply because of Congress.
Outside the convention hall, the Soldiers of Fortune enjoy an organized shootout with some of the weapons on sale at the Armaments Trade Fair, which accompanies their lectures. The ammunition is real, unlike the paint pellets used in this game. A pretend war situation organized like a weekend's holiday in the country to help some Americans relieve their tensions.
I want 2 men up in those bushes. Now, go. Survival game. It's a game that is played with paint pellets and guns that don't hurt anybody, and people have a lot of good fun doing it. I suppose there is a tie-in between the Rambo craze that's going on right now in America and a lot of the things that you've seen here on the show, especially this game.
people come out to play the game call themselves Rambo because they enjoy running around and shooting. We've had psychologists, doctors, dentists, lawyers, all the way down to construction workers and restaurant help.
Rambo's popularity in America is part of Hollywood's success in mythologizing its own history, representing real events in a more heroic light. It used to be the Wild West. It certainly hasn't been Vietnam until recently. With the exceptions of John Wayne's film The Green Berets and The Deer Hunter, 70s Hollywood was critical of American involvement. Films such as Welcome Home Soldier Boys, Apocalypse Now and Coming Home dealt with the guilt, horror and unforeseen legacies of an unpopular war. The box office lost interest in Vietnam. But now it's back in favor with films such as Missing in Action and Uncommon Valor. However, the attitude has changed. Vietnam, it seems, is again a new frontier.
The war, everything that happened here may be wrong, but damn it, don't hate your country for it. Hey, I die for it. And what is it you want?
I want what they want. And every other guy who came over here and spilt his guts and gave everything he had once for our country to love us as much as we love it.
Americans are heroic people. And we haven't been able to express that heroism in anything but movies in the past 20 years. And that's why Sly Stallone and Rambo are so popular and have created such a movement.
It certainly was a bit implausible. But nonetheless, I essentially walked out with a feeling, the guys in the white hats won. And that's no different than the John Wayne type of movies that were so common back during World War II, or Hop-Along Cassidy, where the guys in the white hats shot a lot of guys in black hats.
Rambo is a man who started out as a very flag-waving, patriotic guy, was eventually scorned by the country, and now he's trying to get back his own dignity and regain the pride that he once had and shed the guilt. And that's what I'm trying to accomplish in this film, that these men have nothing to be guilty for. They should be prideful human beings, and they accomplished the job as much as they could accomplish under the situations, under the guidance in which they had. So Rambo is the spokesman for the man whose voice right now isn't loud enough.
When we previewed this film, it was in Tempe, Arizona, right across the street from Arizona State University. And I looked around at the crowd, and believe me, I was really delighted to see the young college students who really grasped what was being projected here, that it wasn't all a Hollywood situation. My son, who is in the Navy, came home, and I had him review the movie with me when it was open to the public. I experienced the same thing, from the small child to the people that are in my age group.
You know, it's just a film, but it opinionates a lot of people. There's a lot of youth out there who see this and they overreact. It's a sensational film. It's overemphasized. Many of the combat veterans that I know who fought in Vietnam feel that this was, completely off base. I feel bad about the film. In many ways, the Vietnam veteran in America, he's a minority, and he's a suppressed minority. I found in my experiences in Vietnam, looking at Delta Company 3rd to 60th 9th Infantry Division, which was my company, I can look at my company and see that it was 98% of the people in my company were drafted, U.S. That means they were drafted. They didn't join.
2nd Battalion, 1st Marine, power to the people. Taking in 9 Purple Hearts, Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, Bronze Star, Army Commendation, and a lot of other shit. This is for my brothers. We don't want to fight anymore, but if we have to fight again, it'll be to take these steps.
And the cold, hard fact of the matter is, and I said it on the floor of the Senate 6 weeks ago, that South Vietnam would be better off losing to North Vietnam than winning with us.
What do you think about a film like Rambo?
Don't ask me.
I could only answer it in obscene terms that would be unfitting even for your sophisticated audience.
John Huston offering his opinion of Hollywood's latest success story. No doubt he, like many others, remembers that North Vietnam never received the $3 billion in war reparations promised by the American government, because it was claimed the Viet Cong was still holding American prisoners of war. Rambo is playing at a cinema near you. John Huston's new film, Prizzi's Honor, opens here next month. Since his directorial debut in 1941 with A Maltese Falcon, Huston has directed 63 features, including The African Queen and Fat City. At 79, he's produced a black comedy about the mafia and American capitalism that has had stateside critics in raptures. In it, Jack Nicholson plays a mafia fixer and Kathleen Turner an out-of-town hit woman. Their romance is marred by only one thing, a contract on each other. Here is a sneak preview of both the film and an exclusive interview with Huston, which will be shown in full on Mediadrome next month.
What do you think of the reception Prizzi's Honor has received in the States?
Oh, simply delighted. I think it's probably the best reviewed picture I've ever made. And then along with this ever so favorable reception of one of the critics, the box office response has been so good.
What was it about Prizzi's Honor that interested you?
The outlandishness of it. You know Condon's work?
Yes, I do.
Well, it's the hyperbole and extravagance, absurdity and high drama too. It's a mixture of those qualities that make it very special, I think.
Now, you know, you guys, you need a woman on this stand.
A woman?
Yeah. Look, Charlie, the woman comes out of the south apartment holding a baby. After Filargi's bodyguard gets him out of his apartment, she smiles at them. She goes goo-goo gaga to the baby. Then she tosses the little darling at the bodyguard, who naturally tries to catch it. Now, while he's doing that, she gets her piece out and covers him. Then you come out of the other apartment, you take Filargi down to the garage. Then she takes the bodyguard back into Filargi's apartment, does a job on him there.
Hey, that's good. For Christ's sake. Where we gonna get a baby? Where we gonna find a broad would do something like this?
Where? Here. Me. We got a fake baby.
Hey, good thinking, Irene.
I got a terrific dinner almost ready. Just be a couple minutes.
Pop, what's the matter with you? I didn't get married so my wife could go on working.
How successfully do you feel you've balanced the comic and farcical elements of the film with a more underlying seriousness?
Well, that's the nature of the beast. That's Condon's style. It's Condon. I think that one forgets that. It's a question of character. You're simply true to the characters. And the characters are at one moment absurd, and the next moment you regard them with great seriousness. They're funny without knowing it, and they're dreadful without knowing it, or dramatic without knowing it.
I love you, Charlie.